Hello to all my students. I am Dr. Utsav Bansal, ophthalmology faculty at Marrow and a practicing clinician having my own small clinic, Soch Eye Care. I was able to open my own clinic because I always dreamed of opening it. I always dreamed of having my own place to practice at. I always used to read this quote from our former president APJ Abdul Kalam, which says, dream, dream and dream, because dreams are what turn into thoughts and thoughts are the stuff which result into actions. Whatever I used to do was with one motive, to be able to own my clinic as soon as possible. Why am I telling you this? I am telling you this because I want you to dream to be able to clear your NEET PG whenever it happens or your INI-CET, whatever your aim is. The more you dream, the more you think about it, the more your actions turn you towards that goal, towards that dream of yours. In this session, guys, I will be discussing the INI-CET recall questions, as well as the important topics that you need to study from ophthalmology moving forwards, and a little bit of strategy, whatever I can tell you. So let's start with the first question that was asked in this INI-CET. This is the question, guys. True statement regarding Kayser-Fleischer ring. So first of all, KF ring. We all know the full form as Kayser-Fleischer. Right, guys? Now they have asked true statements. So all the 4 questions that were asked from ophthalmology were having multiple choice correct answers, as you can see in the options like this: A and E, A, B, E, A, B, C, D, B, C, D, E. These kind of options certainly make our job much more difficult, because rather than choosing 1 out of the 4 correct, which we can even do by a little bit of, akkad bakkad bambe bo, or by ruling out 2 options and then trying to find out the best correct answer with a possibility of 50% correct, 50% wrong. These are slightly more tougher. The questions were not difficult, but because of these multiple correct answer questions, they were slightly more tougher, right? So let's see this question with each option one by one. Now, let's see option A first of all. They are saying that Kayser-Fleischer ring is seen in all patients with neurological involvement. So as we know, Kayser-Fleischer ring, the question is basically on Wilson's disease. Wilson's disease is affecting the neurological system as well as primarily the hepatic or the liver. Yes, liver system. So now let's see the option D also here. Seen in all patients with hepatic involvement. So there were 2 similar options. Now going by logic, one should have been correct, one should have been wrong. So what is the fundamental here? Let's see everybody. So KF ring, Wilson's disease. Wilson's disease having neurological involvement and having hepatic involvement. If there is neurological involvement due to copper deposition at basal ganglia. So just a little bit of your correlation, guys, that copper gets deposited on the basal ganglia. That is why there are neurological manifestations. 100% cases have KF ring. Okay. I recently had a patient having cerebellar ataxia, in which Wilson's disease was suspected based on all the diagnoses and all the investigations, etc. And we saw that there was a fully formed KF ring in that patient. Whereas if you have a patient of hepatic involvement, only 50% cases have KF ring. So by this virtue, we can say that which option is correct, everybody? We can say that option A is correct. That KF ring is seen in all patients having neurological involvement, whereas option D is wrong. It is not seen in all the patients with hepatic involvement. Okay, I'm clear? Now, let's move on to option B. We are saying that KF ring is pathognomic of Wilson's disease. Pathognomic is trying to tell us what, everybody? That if there is a KF ring, then it has to be Wilson's disease. So does KF ring occur only in Wilson's disease? The answer is no. KF ring is seen in Wilson's disease, yes, no doubt about that. But it is also seen in cholestatic disorders like primary biliary cholangitis as well as neonatal cholestasis. Okay, so we cannot say that KF ring is pathognomic of Wilson's disease, please. Okay, so again we see that option B is wrong. I hope there is no confusion in this. Now let's come on to option C, everybody. KF ring resolves with desferrioxamine. See, KF ring is at last what? KF ring is deposition of copper. Now we need to chelate copper. So is desferrioxamine a chelating agent for copper? The answer is no. So you will again see that option C is wrong. Then what should be the correct treatment for KF ring? So treatment. Number 1, chelating agents. There are 2 chelating agents which can be used. Penicillamine or trientine. Okay, penicillamine or trientine. Both these agents are given orally and lifelong. Please remember this word, that they have to be given lifelong. Now, why do they have to be given lifelong? Because KF ring disappears on treatment for about 3 to 5 years, but reappears on discontinuation of treatment. Am I absolutely clear about this? So any of these 2 drugs that we are giving, chelating agents, they have to be given lifelong. Otherwise, the KF ring will reappear again. Okay? Now, a lot of you must have read one more treatment for KF ring, that is zinc. So now if the treatment is penicillamine or trientine, then what is the role of zinc? Zinc is basically a maintenance therapy. So after penicillamine and trientine have done their job, zinc is being used as a maintenance therapy to maintain the status. Zinc stops or prevents, I can say, the absorption of copper. So basically, what is the difference? You understand? Penicillamine and trientine are chelating the copper and are aiding in the excretion of copper in urine. But zinc will not aid in the excretion of the copper already deposited. Zinc will only act as a maintenance therapy after we have decoppered the body. Then it will stop the further absorption of copper and thus the further deposition of copper. Are we clear about this, everybody? Done? So this is basically your small treatment, and by this virtue we can very easily say that option C, that it resolves with desferrioxamine, is a wrong option. Now we come on to option E. This is seen in superior and inferior Descemet's membrane. Now let's talk about the basic fact of what is a Kayser-Fleischer ring. We already know this. Kayser-Fleischer ring is a topic which has been asked again and again, over and over. So KF ring is copper deposition in Descemet's membrane. Right, guys? I hope we know this. I hope we know this. If we don't, then how do I remember it, guys? I remember it by this mnemonic, KFC delivery. Okay. What does this tell us? K for F for Kayser-Fleischer, C for deposition of copper, and D for Descemet's membrane. Okay. So KF copper Descemet's KFC ring. Now, where does it get deposited in the Descemet's membrane? Descemet's membrane, periphery. Now, if you remember the anatomy, periphery of Descemet's membrane is known as Schwalb's line. So we say the KF ring is copper deposition from Schwalb's line up to 5 mm on the cornea. I hope you understand. From the periphery, that is Schwalb's line, and then moving centrally up to only 5 mm onto the cornea. That is the location. Yes? Now, the copper granules are mixed with sulfur, and that is why on examination the color of ring changes with different color illuminations. This is not something which we usually use to diagnose it, but yes, if in doubt, we can use this. Am I absolutely clear about this to everybody here? I hope there is no confusion in this. Right, guys? Now, please remember, KF ring is always bilateral. It is always bilateral, and it causes no loss of vision. There is no visual loss. Okay? Now, KF ring appears first. So there is an order in which it appears. Superiorly, then it appears inferiorly, and then ultimately we see a complete circumferential ring. Okay? So from superior to inferior, and then the nasal and the temporal side to become a complete circle or a circumferential ring. Okay? I will show you the image of a Kayser-Fleischer ring if you have not seen that. Everybody on the screen. As you should be able to see in this image, I would hope you would see inferiorly this ring, golden brown color seen here, and even superiorly you can see this ring, golden brown in color. Thicker deposits, this is a circumferential case, so even peripherally, but thinner deposits can be seen in the periphery. So this is what is Kayser-Fleischer ring. Right, guys? In this image, you are able to see the Kayser-Fleischer ring because this is a light colored iris. I hope you understand. In Asians, in Indians, we have dark colored iris, brown irises. Over a brown iris, to be able to see a golden brown ring is slightly difficult. So usually we say KF ring can be diagnosed on slit lamp examination. It is difficult to see it via a naked eye or via a torchlight. So if ever a question is asked on how to diagnose a KF ring, please never say torchlight. Please always say slit lamp examination. I hope you understand the reason. Dark iris, dark brown, over that you cannot see a brown colored ring very easily. Yes, guys? Now, just to complete my topic of Wilson's disease, everybody, apart from KF ring, what is the important clinical feature which is seen in Wilson's disease? We have talked a lot about KF ring, but if we know Wilson's disease, we know that the other feature in Wilson's disease is the image that we can see on the screen, and this is known as sunflower cataract. Yes, guys? Sunflower cataract. Opacity is in the center, again due to deposition of copper onto the lens capsule and the cortex, everybody, radiating out. Okay, so it starts from the center and then it radiates out, gives the appearance of a bud of a sunflower, and that is why popularly known as a sunflower cataract. Please remember, sunflower cataract also causes minimal visual disturbance. Very rarely do we see that sunflower cataract progresses to such a magnitude that the patient will come to you complaining of loss of vision. Even if it is there, very minimal loss of vision is there due to this faint opacity. Am I clear? Now, in 2017 All India or NEET, a question was asked on diagnosis of Wilson's disease given an image of KF ring. So again, as I'm saying, this is one of the favorite questions of the examiners. They are asking such questions more and more. The topics remain the same, the questions keep on changing, the options keep on changing. So how to diagnose KF ring or how to diagnose Wilson's disease? So please remember, if KF ring is present, then for Wilson's diagnosis, we need two things. Number one, decreased levels of serum ceruloplasmin. Secondly, I will say plus increased 24-hour urinary copper excretion. Okay? But if serum ceruloplasmin is greater than 20 milligram per deciliter, then liver biopsy also needed for diagnosis. Am I absolutely clear about this? I hope I am. Yes? So if KF ring is present, this is how we diagnose the case. Please remember, the investigation of choice, so as to say, is 24-hour urinary copper excretion and not decreased serum ceruloplasmin levels, as there can be decreased serum ceruloplasmin in 15% of normal population also. Okay? So even though we are saying investigation of choice, but as I am trying to explain you, it is never one test which is able to diagnose Wilson's disease. It is a multitude of findings and tests which can confirm the diagnosis of Wilson's disease for us. Right, guys? That's it about our question number 1. That is on Kayser-Fleischer ring. If we see the question back again, everybody, we should be able to see that we have 2 correct options. That KF ring is seen in all patients with neurological involvement. Only 50% of hepatic involvement, so option wrong, is not pathognomic for Wilson's disease, resolves with, I will say, penicillamine, and is seen in superior and inferior Descemet's membrane. That is absolutely correct. So our correct option becomes from these options A and E only. Okay, everybody? So A and E, these are the only 2 correct options. So moving on to the second question, guys. This was probably one of the easiest questions from ophthalmology. Out of all the 4 easy questions, this was the easiest. The question was, iritis is seen in all except. The only thing that students needed to pay attention on was that it was asking all except. So they were basically asking, iritis is not seen in which of the following options. This was again a multiple choice correct answer. I don't have the options as provided, but there were more than one correct answer in this. Now let's see, everybody. As soon as we hear the word iritis, what are we thinking about? Iridocyclitis. I hope you remember. Iritis plus cyclitis is iridocyclitis. Or I can say anterior uveitis. Yes? So the question is basically asking you the causes of anterior uveitis. Now, if you were able to narrow this down, which you should have been able to everybody, then anterior uveitis causes can be divided into 2. I hope we remember. Granulomatous and non-granulomatous. Now, none of the options listed are granulomatous primarily. So, granulomatous mein what do we say, everybody, as the options? Sarcoidosis, syphilis, tuberculosis, leprosy, then histoplasmosis, and the list can go on. Okay. Now let's talk about the non-granulomatous causes. I'm just revising it for you very quickly. Non-granulomatous causes, we have read that the most common cause is idiopathic. A beautiful word invented by all the medical fraternity when they don't know anything. They just say idiopathic and the patient will think, oh wow, idiopathic, right? Secondly, we say HLA-B27 associated. Thirdly, we say Behçet's. Number 4, inflammatory bowel disease. Number 5, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. Number 6, Fuchs heterochronic iridocyclitis. Number 7, lens-induced uveitis. Okay, so these are the usual list that we try to remember. Even if we remember this usual list, we should have been able to answer this question. Let's see everybody the options in the question now. Let's go on to the easiest option that we know is correct. Behçet's disease causes anterior uveitis. We read it every day. Yes or no? Yes. Ulcerative colitis, a form of inflammatory bowel disease, again causes the anterior uveitis, iritis. Yes. Then psoriatic arthritis. Psoriatic arthritis is an HLA-B27 associated condition. So yes, it also causes anterior uveitis. Now, let's discuss these in a certain detail and then I will move back to the other two options. Let's first focus on option B, Behçet's disease, everybody. So how do we diagnose Behçet's disease if we know? So this is the criteria for diagnosis of Behçet's disease. So in Behçet's disease, we say the first important thing is recurrent oral ulceration, and the word we use is aphthous ulcers. Okay, everybody? These have to be observed at least 3 times in 1 year. Now, what are aphthous ulcers? Let me show you a photograph. This kind of a photograph may be used in the upcoming examinations in questions. As you would know, as we have spoken so often, everybody, the questions are using images which are clinical. Clinical means which you will see in your OPDs. Clinical does not mean out of the world. Clinical just means as a doctor, when you are sitting in a OPD, whatever you see, they are using that kind of knowledge, that kind of language and information into questions, right guys? So this is what an aphthous ulcer is. These are recurrent at least 3 times over the past 1 year. That is the main diagnostic criteria. Along with this, there have to be 2 or more of the following. Either recurrent genital ulcers, then ocular injury. When we say ocular injury, we are saying anterior or posterior uveitis, basically, which has to be documented by an ophthalmologist. Skin. Skin mein what do we see? Erythema nodosum. That's the word that we should be focusing on. And then pathergy test. Pathergy test is diagnosed 24 to 48 hours by the doctor. Okay, everybody? No confusion about this. Any of the 2, a positive pathergy test, skin injury, ocular injury, that is uveitis, or recurrent genital ulcer, along with aphthous oral ulcers. That is the diagnosis of Behçet's disease. Okay? Please remember, ocular manifestations of Behçet's disease occur in 70% cases. They are always bilateral and they are more common in men. So when we are talking about the ocular manifestations of Behçet's disease, these are the primary etiological factors that we need to remember. Now please remember that in Behçet's disease, what occurs is anterior uveitis with hypopyon. Hypopyon means what, everybody? Hypopyon means what, everybody? I hope you remember. Pus in the anterior chamber. But in this case, we call it a cold hypopyon because there is no red eye. Okay, everybody? So even though there is hypopyon, but there is no redness, so the word cold hypopyon has got associated with this. Am I absolutely clear? Along with this, everybody, if I ask you what is the most common ocular manifestation of Behçet's disease, then the answer will be non-granulomatous, necrotizing vasculitis. This is the most common manifestation, more common than anterior uveitis, retinal vasculitis. Okay, everybody? Are we clear about Behçet's disease, I hope? Now, moving back to our options, everybody. Ulcerative colitis. Ulcerative colitis is a form of inflammatory bowel disease. There are two types of inflammatory bowel disease: ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. Please remember, 12% cases of ulcerative colitis versus 2.4% cases of Crohn's disease cause anterior uveitis or are associated with anterior uveitis. I hope I'm absolutely clear about this. No confusion here. No specific feature. Now, moving on to option E, psoriatic arthritis. So I hope we know that psoriasis basically primarily is a skin disease which presents with silvery plaques. But along with that, in terms of arthritis, psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis affects the distal interphalangeal joint, which leads to swelling and which presents as the image. Everybody, what will you diagnose it as? If any one of you is a non-vegetarian, you would be able to name this much more easily than our vegetarian friends. Sausage digits. Am I clear to everybody? They are swollen up like sausages, and that is one of the diagnostic signs of psoriatic arthritis. I hope I am pretty clear here. There should be no confusion in this. Yes or no? Now, this is an HLA-B27 associated condition. So what are the other HLA-B27 associated conditions? So please remember, number 1, ankylosing spondylitis. Number 2, everybody, Ritter's disease. And number 3, psoriatic arthritis. Number 4, in 60% cases, ulcerative colitis is also HLA-B27 positive. So just an extra HLA-B27, but yes, it is also in 60% cases involved with HLA-B27 positivity. Am I clear to everybody? No confusion about this? Now, on first looks in the question, rheumatoid arthritis, have we ever learnt it as a cause of iritis, iridocyclitis, or for that matter, anterior uveitis? The answer is no. What does rheumatoid arthritis present with? In the eye, it presents with dry eye. It presents with scleritis. It presents with peripheral, ulcerative keratitis. In whatever the ocular manifestation list of rheumatoid arthritis is, it is very impossible, I can say, to find out the word iritis, iridocyclitis or anterior uveitis. Similarly, if we talk about option D, that is SLE. Yes, SLE is nowhere listed usually as a cause of anterior uveitis. Even though I am saying usually it is not listed. But if I show you a reference table, this reference table is from Parsons. If we see this table, we see rheumatoid arthritis, intraocular features iridocyclitis, SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus, specifically the word iritis is mentioned. What to do now? This is Parsons. Parsons is mentioning both the answers as having iridocyclitis or iritis. But apart from this table from Parsons, nowhere else, no reference I have been able to find, whatever book I may have looked into, whatever higher source of book, stating that rheumatoid or SLE can be associated with iritis or iridocyclitis. Now, in such a case, what should have been the answer? If there was an option stating A and D, then the answer to this question would have been A and D. That is the answer. Okay? If the question did not state A and D, then the second best answer I will say, everybody, none of above. Second best answer. I have not got to know the actual options that were provided in the questions, everybody. If any one of you knows or remembers the options, please do provide me the options. But these will be the answers. A and D as the best answer, and the second best answer will be none of the above. I hope I am pretty clear about this. No confusion there should be. Am I clear to everybody? Done. That's the second question. Now let's move on to our third question. So the question is true regarding POAG. So what is POAG, everybody? I hope we know this. Primary open angle glaucoma. Obviously, to solve this question, the basic knowledge is needed that there are two types of glaucoma, open angle and angle closure. Yes, guys? So let's first of all see this image. Let's first understand the very basics and then move forward with the options. Okay. So we have two types of angles, open angles and angle closure. What is the difference between the two, everybody? In open angle, we see that the whole route of flow of aqueous is open. From the ciliary body gets produced into the posterior chamber, from there it travels into the anterior chamber, from there it travels into the corner, and then there is an outflow. Why is glaucoma occurring in this case? Because of blockage of trabecular meshwork. Mesh means, I can say, a kind of jali, yes? This gets blocked due to some kind of residue or some kind of, we can say, kachra in the mesh. So the aqueous is not able to flow out. That is open angle glaucoma. Now, what is angle closure glaucoma, everybody? When we talk about angle closure glaucoma, we see this image. The aqueous is not able to flow out because the iris and the cornea in the periphery are touching each other. So the angle, what is the angle, everybody? When we are talking about the angle, we are talking about the iridocorneal angle. The angle between the iris and the cornea. This is closed. Yes? That is why we call it angle closure glaucoma. Am I absolutely clear about this? Yes? Now let's move on to the options to understand what they have asked. So the question is on open angle glaucoma. When the angle is absolutely open, this is my cornea, this is my iris, the angle is open. Not like this. This is angle closed. This is angle open. I hope all of you can see angle open. Now, they have said abnormality of trabecular meshwork. Yes or no? Yes, open angle glaucoma has abnormality of trabecular meshwork. So if we read this much of the option, we want to say it is true. But if we read the second part of this option, abnormality of trabecular meshwork is seen on gonioscopy. That is where the option becomes wrong. What are we saying? We are saying that open angle glaucoma is due to problems of trabecular meshwork. Yes. But can those abnormalities be seen on gonioscopy? The big answer is no. Why no? Let's try to understand this. Gonioscopy. What is gonioscopy? Gonioscopy is an investigation through which we visualize the angle of anterior chamber and its structures. Okay, everybody? So basically we are visualizing the structures or the small space present between the iris and the cornea. Okay? Just a very rough diagram. What are the four structures, everybody? Ciliary body band, scleral spur, trabecular meshwork and Schwalb's line. Can't see this stuff. That is how I remember this. Can't see this stuff. You understand, everybody? We can't see the angle structures normally, so we can't see this stuff. So we are resorting to an investigation called gonioscopy to see this. If the angle is open as seen in the diagram, we will be able to see all the four structures: ciliary body band, scleral spur, trabecular meshwork and Schwalb's line. That's all. That's it. We cannot see any abnormality. We are not seeing the microstructure. We are just trying to visualize the structure. Am I clear to everybody? Had it been an angle closure glaucoma, what would have occurred? The iris would have moved forwards. What do I mean to say? Let's see. Had it been an angle closure glaucoma, the iris would have moved forward and would have been present here. So now when I would do gonioscopy, I would see only trabecular meshwork and Schwalb's line because the two structures, the ciliary body band and scleral spur, are hidden. Let's see another case. If it was a highly progressed angle closure glaucoma, let's say this is how my iris was. Then what do I see? I don't see any structure, no ciliary body, no scleral spur, no trabecular meshwork, maybe not even Schwalb's line, complete closure. So we basically say that gonioscopy helps in the diagnosis of angle closure glaucoma. In open angle glaucoma, I am able to see all the four structures. Yes? For a more detailed understanding, let's see this image. Okay? This is called the Schaffer's grading system for angle width. If we are able to see all the four structures, everybody here, this is my Schwalb's line, this is my trabecular meshwork, this is my scleral spur, and this is my ciliary body band. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, everybody? I hope you understand this. Done? That means my angle is open. Just a diagrammatic presentation. As we go, in grade 1 we see we are not able to see anything. We are only able to see Schwalb's line. Okay, everybody? Just this line. Can you see? Only the Schwalb's line. All the other structures are hidden. Whereas in grade 0, no structures visible. Okay? Done? So gonioscopy does not diagnose any abnormality on trabecular meshwork. Gonioscopy diagnoses open angle glaucoma because all the four structures are seen. I hope I am pretty clear about this. Yes? Now, what is a gonioscope? Let's see the image, everybody. This is what a gonioscope looks like. This is called a 4-mirror gonioscope. Why it is called a 4-mirror gonioscope, you should be able to understand in the photo adjacent to it. There are 4 mirrors, everybody. Mirror number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, everybody? I'll just rub these. In all these 4 mirrors, what we are able to see is the angle of anterior chamber in 4 sides: superior, inferior, temporal, and nasal. So we are able to see a 360-degree angle. This is what a gonioscopy looks like. Obviously, it is not a zoom photograph, so you cannot make it out. This is just to explain you how it looks when you are looking through a gonioscope. I hope I am pretty clear about this. So I will say there is no abnormality of trabecular meshwork seen in gonioscopy. Okay? I will write on gonioscopy, in open angle glaucoma, all 4 structures of angle seen. That's all we are talking about. Okay, very good. Now option B, everybody. This was a tricky option because probably we have not heard of it or we have not read it too often, everybody. First degree relatives. First degree relatives means your parents or your brothers or your sisters, something like that. First degree relatives have more chance of developing steroid-induced glaucoma. We are saying that if I have open angle glaucoma, my brother has more chances of developing steroid-induced glaucoma. Yes? Let's see. So I'd like to show you a photograph which will make this point crystal clear. Everybody, factors associated with an increased risk for steroid response or steroid-induced glaucoma. So if I have open angle glaucoma myself, I will have more chances of developing steroid-induced glaucoma. First degree relatives, this is where the question was asked from. The examiners love to ask questions from tables, everybody. That is why it is often said, when I was doing my pre-PG preparation, then also I heard it from my teachers. It is very important to focus on the tables. The tables are usually converted into questions, so don't ever miss a table. If you come across any table in your theory reading, try to focus on those points. Those are kind of hidden gems which are asked as questions. Then very young age or old age, high myopia. You all know high myopia is associated. Previous steroid response. If steroid led to the increase of IOP previously, then again, type 1 diabetes, connective tissue disease, and penetrating keratoplasty. The surgery for corneal transplantation or the surgery which is corneal transplantation. Please remember all these factors are associated with steroid-induced glaucoma or higher risk for steroid response. Done? Crystal clear? So we know that the second option is absolutely correct. Now we move on to the third option. Dilatation of pupil is associated with exacerbation of IOP. If you have read even a little bit of glaucoma, you know that this option is absolutely wrong. Why, everybody? Dilatation of pupil is associated with exacerbation of IOP in angle closure glaucoma, as it precipitates pupillary block. Am I absolutely clear? That is why in angle closure glaucoma we say which drug is contraindicated, everybody? Atropine or home atropine for that matter, all the mydriatic and cycloplegics. That is why in angle closure glaucoma patient is advised not to visit cinema halls. Okay, everybody? This fundamental does not apply to open angle glaucoma at all. Because the angle closure glaucoma, the angle is already closed. When we dilate the pupil, it will precipitate the block. It will precipitate the flowing of aqueous from posterior chamber to anterior chamber. I hope we are all clear about this. Done? Now, let's move on to option D. First degree relatives are at 1% increased risk of POAG. Again, this was one of those options which we didn't know about. This option is again wrong. Why is this option wrong? Let's see, everybody. So, POAG is associated with family history. We know this. We have written this. We have read this in our notes. 3 genes are implicated. The first gene implicated is myocilin. The second gene implicated is, everybody, WDR36. And the third gene is optineurin. So when there is family history, why isn't there a risk? There is a risk, everybody, but the option says first degree relatives are at a 1% increased risk. First degree relatives are at an 10% to 20% increased risk of POAG. So the reason why this option is wrong is because of the percentage. The percentage is not only 1%, there is a very high chance of family history. So 10 to 20%. In this first degree relatives, everybody, if your sibling means your brother or your sister, has POAG, you have higher chances of developing POAG compared to if your parents have POAG. You understand what I'm trying to say? If your mother has POAG, then you have lesser chances of developing POAG vis-a-vis if your brother or sister has POAG. Am I absolutely clear? So a sibling has greater chances of giving the POAG. Am I clear to everybody? No confusion about this? Are we clear about this? Now, let's move on to option E. Option E I have marked is correct. Why is option E correct? That is the question now. So why is option E correct? Let's understand that, everybody. We say usually the visual field defects occur after nerve fiber loss, or I can say optic disc changes. Usually we say that visual field defects occur after optic disc changes. Optic disc changes means CD ratio is increased. Okay? But I have used the word usually here, everybody. That is the main thing. I have used the word usually. The option says first visual field defect can exist with normal CD ratio. Yes, it can. See the English here. They are not saying visual field defect will always occur with normal CD ratio, or they are not saying visual field defect will always present with a normal CD ratio before a CD ratio enlargement or something like that. They are just saying can. Can it? Yes, it can. Medical sciences mein everything can basically. Yes. Now the question is why it can, everybody? So let's look at this photograph. In this photograph, we see this wedge-shaped defect. This is called as RNFL, retinal nerve fiber layer wedge-shaped defect. This wedge-shaped defect is due to obviously nerve fiber loss. But the nerve fiber loss has not reached the neural rim. Nerve fiber loss is there, but it has not reached the neural rim. Because it has not reached the neural rim, CD ratio is normal. So even with CD ratio normal, because there is RNFL wedge-shaped defect, yes, visual field defects can be seen. Am I absolutely clear about this? Yes? So using this fundamental, we say there are two options correct in this, option B and option E, and that is why our answer is B and E only. Am I absolutely clear? That's all about the third question. Now we move on to our last question, which was asked in IANI CET as far as ophthalmology was concerned. So this was the fourth question from ophthalmology, everybody. How to differentiate the causes of a dilated pupil? This was supposedly a difficult question. Supposedly, I don't know why. Supposedly because students have mentioned that. Supposedly because as soon as we hear the word pupil in any question or read the word pupil in any question, we presume it to be difficult. But if you had even a basic knowledge of the pupillary involvement, you should have been able to answer this question, right? See, there are two actions a pupil can perform. A pupil can constrict and a pupil can dilate. Constriction is a parasympathetic activity. Dilatation is a sympathetic activity. That means if the parasympathetic activity is lost, constriction will not be able to occur and I will have a dilated pupil. Whereas if the sympathetic activity is lost, dilatation will not be able to occur and I will have a constricted pupil. Am I clear? Now going by common sense, everybody, I'm talking about common sense, I'm not explaining you anything right now. Going by common sense, I will say, if I have a dilated pupil and I need to diagnose it by doing some test, the test should do what, everybody? The test should constrict my pupil. Am I right? Why? Because my pupil is dilated because constriction is not occurring. Now, which of the drugs are constricting my pupil out of the options given? I can very confidently say option B and option C. If I look at all the other three drugs, phenylephrine, adrenergic agent, cocaine, adrenergic agent, epinephrine, obviously. So all these three drugs should be used when my pupil is constricted, because in a constricted pupil, my test should dilate a pupil to be able to diagnose. Are you getting what I'm saying? Let's just see. This is very basic common sense I'm trying to tell you so that you did not have to waste even 30 seconds on this question. I'm saying if the pupil is dilated, dilated pupil means inability to constrict, parasympathetic problem. If there is inability to constrict, my test should be able to constrict. Constrict means pilocarpine. If my pupil is constricted, that means there is inability to dilate, sympathetic lesion. That means all the sympathetic drugs which are able to dilate a pupil should be used for the test. Okay? Just based on this fundamental, I should have been able to answer the question and the answer would have been B and C only.
If you don't understand this fundamental or basics, then let's move on to the difficult way to solve this question. This kind of a table you must have seen in the book Everybody Soch or in the lectures on marrow. Everybody, I have discussed this anisocoria. So what is anisocoria, everybody? We all know anisocoria is difference in the size of pupil between the two eyes. Okay? If there is a different size in the pupil which is greater in light, light means when you are throwing light. When you're throwing light on both the pupils should do what, everybody? Both the pupils should constrict. Yes, but if on throwing light one pupil constricts, one pupil does not constrict, then which pupil is abnormal in such a case? The pupil which is not able to constrict, or the pupil which is dilated. So this is basically my differential diagnosis of a dilated pupil. That is what was asked in the question. Am I absolutely clear about this? Yes? Now let's see, everybody. First of all, we look at the pupil shape. If the pupil shape is abnormal, then there has to be some damage to the iris. Pupil is an aperture within the iris. No problem. Case solved. Done. Now, if the pupil shape is normal, first of all, I use the drug diluted pilocarpine, or I can say pilocarpine 0.1%. Yes, our option C. Now, what occurs when I use a diluted pilocarpine? When I use a diluted pilocarpine, if the affected or the abnormal or the dilated pupil constricts, my diagnosis is tonic pupil. The question is why? Yes, why does a tonic pupil constrict on using a diluted pilocarpine? For that, let's understand this pathway. Everybody, we know this pathway. This is the pathway for light reflex. First of all, the impulse comes from optic nerve. Then it goes into the pretectal nucleus. From the pretectal nucleus, it goes into the Edinger-Westphal nucleuses, everybody. So this is my pretectal nucleus. This is my Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Okay, everybody? Optic nerve coming, going here. Then it goes into this green. Green is what, everybody? Third nerve. Then from the third nerve, it goes into the ciliary ganglion, then into the short ciliary nerve. In tonic pupil, where is the lesion? I hope all of us remember that in tonic pupil, the lesion is either in the short ciliary nerve or in the ciliary ganglion. So I can say basically there is a post-ganglionic lesion. Yes. Because there is a post-ganglionic lesion, what is occurring, everybody? Cholinergic stimulus is not getting secreted. Yes. So I will say there is cholinergic supersensitivity or hypersensitivity due to denervation. Okay? Cholinergic supersensitivity due to denervation of sphincter pupillae muscle. Okay? So the receptors on the muscle are supersensitive to any cholinergic stimulus. Yes? So when I give a diluted pilocarpine, because of the supersensitivity, the sphincter pupillae constricts promptly. Am I absolutely clear? And that is why we say diluted pilocarpine leads to the diagnosis of tonic pupil. I hope we are very clear about this. No confusion should be there. Now, if my pupil does not constrict with diluted pilocarpine, that means there is no supersensitivity. If there is no supersensitivity, I will assume my pupil is normal. When I assume my pupil is normal, to confirm that my pupil is normal, I use pilocarpine 1%. When I use pilocarpine 1%, 1% pilocarpine is the normal concentration of pilocarpine. So I'm writing normal concentration used to constrict pupil is 1% pilo. Okay, everybody? So we know that if I put 1% pilo in anybody, any normal patient, my pupil should be able to constrict, yes or no? So when I put 1% pilocarpine, then I see still the pupil is not constricting, everybody. If still the pupil is not constricting, there should be another diagnosis. So my diagnosis then becomes pharmacological mydriasis. What do we mean by pharmacological mydriasis? Pharmacological mydriasis means use of atropine to dilate pupil. Because the pupil has been dilated by atropine, pilocarpine is not able to antagonize the action. And even on use of 1% pilocarpine, my dilated pupil is unable to constrict. Am I clear to everybody? Am I absolutely crystal clear, everybody? Yes. So 0.125% pilocarpine diagnoses tonic pupil, whereas 1% pilocarpine is helpful to diagnose pharmacological mydriasis. Am I crystal clear about this? Yes. So that's what I'm writing. 1% pilocarpine, pupil does not constrict. I have always said in my lectures, these are the two lines which will help you solve a lot of questions. Then the answer is pharmacological mydriasis. And 0.1% pilocarpine, pupil constricts. The answer is tonic pupil, which is also known as, I hope you know, all of you, Adie's pupil. Am I crystal clear about this, everybody? Done. Now let's move on to phenylephrine, cocaine, and epinephrine. How do they help us to diagnose whatever they help us to diagnose? So we are talking about here now, everybody, Horner syndrome. Without going into the detail, what is Horner syndrome? Horner syndrome is oculosympathetic palsy. Okay? Oculosympathetic palsy. So, because there is a sympathetic palsy, the pupil is not able to dilate. So, we say there is meiosis. Yes or no? That is one of the clinical features we say of a case of Horner syndrome. But because of this, everybody, the pupil dilates to adrenergic stimulation because of supersensitivity to any topical agonist or circulating norepinephrine or noradrenaline. Am I clear to everybody? Because it has been denerved, it is myosed, so that is why it has developed supersensitivity to any topical adrenergic agonist which will act directly on the dilator pupillae muscle or if there is any circulating noradrenaline. So that means if my pupil is constricted, myosed, how will I be able to diagnose it? To diagnose, the first test I can do is 4% cocaine test. What does cocaine do? Cocaine blocks the reuptake of noradrenaline or norepinephrine at postganglionic endings. Okay? So, it increases the noradrenaline levels and thus makes the pupil dilate normally. But, I hope you understand, it's very simple, yes? But in Horner syndrome, what is occurring, everybody? Due to sympathetic lesion, there is no noradrenaline in endings, damaged. Yes or no? The superior cervical ganglion is damaged. So there is no noradrenaline in the endings. So Horner's pupil does not dilate with cocaine. I hope you understand this. So that is why cocaine is able to help us diagnose a case of Horner's pupil. A normal pupil will be able to dilate with cocaine due to the blockage of reuptake of noradrenaline, but there is no noradrenaline to block the reuptake of, there is no noradrenaline at all at the postganglionic nerve endings in case of Horner syndrome due to the structural damage, and that is why it is not able to dilate at all. Now, secondly, everybody, drugs like 1% phenylephrine, 2% epinephrine, or 1% apraclonidine. All these are what, everybody? Alpha adrenergic agonists. Yes? So they will directly stimulate dilator pupillae and Horner's pupil will dilate due to what I explained you just now, supersensitivity. Am I clear, everybody? Done? So how these three drugs, everybody given in the question, that is phenylephrine, epinephrine and cocaine, help in the diagnosis of a miotic pupil, or I can primarily say in the diagnosis of Horner's pupil. Am I crystal clear? So as we see, the answer is correctly option B and option C, everybody. Done? So now that we are done with our INI CET recall questions, everybody, let's come on to the fact that all of us are thinking about every day, each passing moment. When is NEET going to happen? If it is going to happen, who is going to conduct it? How is it going to be conducted? I will only say one thing, guys. All these are unknowns. Why do we want to waste time in the unknowns, everybody? Let's focus on what is known to us. Let us struggle in achieving our best. Whatever may be the kind of question or kind of paper, if we are prepared, we would be able to hand it. I know it creates anxiety. I know it is easier done than spoken, everybody. But at last, we need to be able to focus. The most common thing that everybody asks me as a student is, sir, what are the high yielding topics? So that is what I will be trying to shine a little bit of light on moving forward for the NEET or the INI CET that is going to take place in the mid-year, everybody. For ophthalmology, the high yield topics are, number one, anatomy. When I say anatomy, it's such a vast thing. When I say anatomy, focus on the extraocular muscles. The images of nerve supply, of all the extraocular muscles, all the cut sections, everybody, all the cerebral images, everybody. Its actions. When we talk about the extraocular muscle actions, it basically transpires down to squint. Yes? So squint, all types of squint, image-based questions, everybody. Paralytic squint, if I am talking about, if I am talking about restrictive squint, all those questions become important. So take this as one thing, starting from anatomy up to the squint. Lots and lots of questions are asked, will be asked, they are high-yielding, hot topics. When I talk about the anatomy, focus on the anatomy of individual structures in the eye, cornea, what are the layers, what are the functions of each layer. Focus on the anatomy of an innocuous structure such as the lens. Focus on the anatomy, the layers, the names of the retina and the functions, right? A question like, what is the function of the outermost layer of the retina? That is retinal pigment epithelium. It forms the blood-retinal barrier. So a question may be asked just like on blood-brain barrier, on blood-retinal barrier. Am I clear to everybody? So focus on these individual anatomies, mainly on the images, everybody, of the extraocular muscle nerve supply and on the images of the cornea, retina, histology. Okay? Then, side effect of drugs, the ocular side effect of drugs, anti-glaucoma drugs. Okay? All the anti-glaucoma drug side effects, you should know this. This is a very, very, very commonly asked topic, everybody. Then everybody, the other side effects, like side effect of topiramate, is visual field defect. Okay? So such side effects, everybody, wherever you find an ocular side effect of a drug, please try to make a list. If you don't have a list, there is already a list in textbooks. There is a list in Soch. There is a list in Khurana. There is a list in Parsons. Everywhere you will find such a list. Please make sure to keep this as a high yielding list to be able to revise at the end also. Then everybody, this is probably moving forward the highest yielding topic, systemic diseases and their ocular features. But this is easier said than done. Why, everybody? The ocular features are scattered. Yes? We don't know which systemic disease to study. So I will list a few for you. Wilson's disease. The question was asked. Yes, again it will be asked. KF ring, sunflower cataract, these are commonly asked. Diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus presents with cataract. Diabetes mellitus causes constant changes in refractory error. Diabetes mellitus causes a 1-hour topic to study diabetic retinopathy. So a lot to read in diabetes mellitus. Hypertension, right? Similarly, all kind of metabolic diseases, everybody. Myotonic dystrophy. Myotonic dystrophy causes that sad facies, that causes a cataract, so everything can be linked together, everybody. Then, in children, everybody, galactosemia, neurofibromatosis, Sturge-Weber syndrome, okay, all the phacomatoses. Rheumatoid arthritis, or I can say juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. Similarly, I can say HLA-B27 associated diseases, infectious diseases like toxoplasmosis, because they cause retinopathy, posterior uveitis. HIV, very important, okay? Then everybody, other diseases like sarcoidosis, leprosy, syphilis. Okay? If I try to narrow it down for you, the ocular features of systemic diseases should be covered as part of uveitis, glaucoma, retinopathy, and cataract. If we are able to focus on these 4 outcomes of a systemic disease ocularly, we will more or less be able to cover these systemic diseases and their clinical features. Am I clear to everybody? Now, we are again and again saying, everybody is saying, every teacher is saying, every student is saying that the paper is becoming, more clinical. What do we mean by the paper becoming more clinical? Yes. So when I say clinical, I basically say, think about your OPD. But that is where the main problem lies. We have not been regular in our postings, not our fault. This is the way medical education is in majority of the colleges and the medical institutions in India, everybody. We are not encouraged. Even if we are encouraged, we somehow find ways to sideline our postings, everybody. So when you think of your OPD, if I'm saying about ophthalmology, think about everything that you see in ophthalmology, all the clinical techniques, starting from what a slit lamp examination looks like, to everybody simply, how does a cornea get stained, everybody? What is the color of that fluorescein strip? To a very simple investigation which is called as ophthalmoscopy. Ophthalmoscopy is direct, ophthalmoscopy is indirect. If you have been in an OPD, if you have worked in an OPD either as an intern or as a third year MBBS, everybody, you should have done or seen this. When we are talking about this, you should have seen tonometry, the various forms of tonometry, how to do them. See, I'm just not saying that you should have seen the instruments, you should know how to do them. That is important, everybody. Similarly, gonioscopy. Are you getting what I'm saying? Similarly, a very, very, very simple thing, even just like how to test for lacrimation. When I say how to test for lacrimation, everybody, what do we do, everybody? Syringing and probing. So all these are tests which we commonly see. I'm not talking about out of the world things. If I talk about a very basic thing, everybody, we should know the principle of Snellen's chart, how to use a Snellen's chart. We should know color vision tests, Ishihara chart. We should know all those things, how to do them. What are the significances of those? Are you getting what I'm trying to say at last? Yes? Apart from these basic techniques, obviously all other techniques which we commonly don't do, they also become important. So I will say tests like macular function tests. So a question was recently asked on photo stress test. There is another test which should be done, which is not commonly done, Amsler's grid test in this regard. Yes? So investigations in retina like FFA, OCT, perimetry or HFA in glaucoma, right? So all these investigations, if you've seen the videos, everybody, that is how I have tried to teach everybody. that first of all we discuss the investigations, then we discuss the pathogenesis and the treatment of diseases. This is what I want you to focus on. Clinical methods, clinical tests. Open your books again, open your Khunana, open the investigations. You should know what a Calazion scoop looks like. You should know why we are using a Calazion scoop. What are we doing to that? You should know what is a curette. You should know how a 15 number blade looks like versus 11 number blade look like. So all those things that we used to study for our Viva, everybody, we need to go back to that. We need to go back to those 50, 70 pages at last given in Khurana. If you read Khurana, everybody, that is the usual book we have read. That's why I'm mentioning that name. We need to go back to those pages which we struggled with. We need to go back to our clinical books. Whatever we have read, everybody. I know we have not read Cunningham. I know we have not read Hutchinson's. I'm not asking you to go back to those books. Whatever you may have read, we need to go back to those books in each and every subject. Okay? Moving on, everybody. Another important topic, everybody, as far as ophthalmology is concerned, is pupil. For the last 3 years, questions have been regularly asked, just like this year, on Argin-Robinson pupil, tonic pupil, or I can say Horner's, RAPD or AAPD. Okay? So all these kinds of pathologies of pupil, they are being constantly asked. So please do focus on pupil as a topic. Then everybody, lastly, please make sure that you cover all the previous year questions, 10 years. Not because you want them to get repeated. Because, let's say, example I am giving, previously a question was asked, theory question, on something called as cystoid macular edema. So what we are seeing the trend, if the question theoretically has been asked on cystoid macular edema, that topic is getting repeated as an image-based question. So you will get an FFA image of CME showing flower petal appearance. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Similarly, let's say a lot of times theory question has been asked on your snowflake cataract, which is due to diabetes. So now you can expect an image of snowflake cataract. I hope you are understanding what I'm trying to say here. Yes? Before today, a lot of questions were asked on tonometry and its types. Question was image-based, IBQ on Goldman's applanation tonometry, identified. Questions on ophthalmoscopy. You will find various questions in the previous 10 years saying all of the following are true about ophthalmoscopy, indirect or direct, except. Now there will be image-based questions on the same. I hope what I am trying to say you understand. Take all the previous 10-year questions, try to understand what topic has been asked, obviously, and then see the image of those topics. Those are the kind of images which are more likely to be repeated. If you are afraid of the images, this is what you need to do. Yes? These are just these high-yield topics. It does not mean that you need not read any other thing. Even if you read this, you will somewhere realize that you have almost covered everything, everybody. Yes? So please, 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 please do read these high yields. Now, when you are thinking moving ahead, everybody, all of us are lost these days. Yes? We are lost of how to study. Of how to study, how to keep yourself motivated. I always say, the motivation lies within. The motivation is to be able to succeed, everybody, in our NEET, in our INICET. The motivation is not to waste any more time than we have already wasted, everybody. What with all the BAMS, BUHS also becoming doctors, everybody with 6 months. We can't waste any more time. See, this is just a way to motivate myself. I probably motivate myself like this. You can motivate yourself in whichever way you want. But that is what this screen says. Push yourself. You need to push yourself. I am not going to come and keep telling you every day, study, study, study. You are no more in class 11th or 12th that your mother and father will get the TV cable cut and ask you to study. You are adults now. The onus is on yourself. You are studying because you want to succeed in life. You are doing it for yourself. So keep pushing yourself. Keep finding reasons to study. Just like we find reasons to skip our classes, we ask our friends to give a proxy. We find reasons. Our brain is fantastic. It can find reasons to whatever we put our mind on. So now your mind should be on one word. and that is study. Study, 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 and study and study. That should be the only word, right? Now, how did I push myself to study? I'll just tell you, probably this will motivate you. One of my friends in college on my birthday had gifted me a nice poster with a number 1 written like this. It was not this poster. Obviously, I have not been able to find it as an image, but it had number 1 written, only this number 1. And in this one, there were a lot of, images formed. Let's say one image of Tendulkar, one image of Nelson Mandela, one of Michael Jordan. So all those successful personalities, all those images were filled in this number 1. It was a very beautiful, a very graphically beautiful poster. So I just put it on the Almirah door, everybody. So there was my poster. My bed was here. So the poster was situated at such a place that as soon as I woke up in the morning, the first thing that I used to see every day was this poster. I was in love with that poster. But somewhere this poster got into my subconscious. Whenever I was trying to read in my internship and I was daydreaming, yes, we all of us daydream, what did I daydream about? I daydreamed about rank 1. Because that was the visual I was presented with every morning when I woke up. That is what I used to keep thinking every time about. That what if I get rank 1? So every time I was needing motivation, the motivation came within Utsav. You need to get rank 1. When you get rank 1, you will have all the posters everywhere with your photographs. That time the posters were a big thing, with all the photographs posted everywhere, rank 1 Dr. Utsav Bansal. I didn't get rank 1. I got nowhere close to rank 1. Let me tell you that. But that is what gave me the propulsion to study. I dreamed that I will have interviews taken. I dreamed that I will probably be able to earn a lot more money also if I get rank 1. Yes, that was my motivation. I didn't need any other motivation. Day, night, every time, this is what was going into my mind. So that's what I'm saying. Find your motivation yourself. Please find your motivation yourself. Now, everybody, just a little bit of how you should study. Let's say, assuming there are 3 months left for your NEET or next, whatever that may be, in 2021. I'm not going to go into the details. There have been various other faculties given you various fantastic strategies, everybody. I will just say that there are 2 groups of students according to me. Group 1, who were already on track for January attempt. That means if you were not one of those students who was complaining, I have not been able to revise, I don't remember everything. You were on track, your preparations were very good. I will say, take a day off. Reset your timeline. Okay? If you had done 2 revisions, do a 3rd revision. If you had done 3, do a 4th. When you are resetting your timeline, please remember that in the first month, moving on from now, you give time to your weaker subjects. Obviously, everybody has weak subjects and strong subjects. In the 2nd month, revise all your strongest subjects. And in the 3rd month, revise only notes. Am I clear to everybody? Right now, because you have got that extra time, because you're already prepared, let's say in 15 subjects, you have got that extra time, so you can actually watch a video of a topic also if you want. Okay, in the 1st month, to make your weak subject also up to mark. 2nd, just revise, and 3rd, revise only your notes. And apart from this, the basic fundamental should be, in the 1st month, 70% theory, 30% time MCQs. In the 2nd month, it should become 40% theory, because you are onto your stronger subjects. 60% MCQs. Whereas in the last month before preparation, it should be 90% MCQs and only 10% theory. That should be the amount of time you devote. Out of 10 hours, 7, 3, 4, 6, 9, 1, everybody. Yes? So, moving forwards, your MCQs time should increase and the time you devote to reading theory should decrease. That is the basic gist of it. Okay? But if you are a group 2 student, what do I mean to say by group 2? Group 2 student means not ready for January attempt. That means this is a blessing in disguise for you guys. If the exam was being held in January, all of you had given up hopes. You said we have not been able to revise also even once. How you should do, everybody, moving forward? The next 45 days, revision 1. After 45 days, 30 days, revision 2. Last 15 days, only high yield. Revision 3. Okay, 90 days, guys. Again, the fundamentals should remain the same. No new stuff to be learned. Okay, everybody? You don't have time to learn new stuff if you have already been lacking behind. You have just reset your January to March, so you have enough time to be able to revise. The fundamental remains the same. MCQs will increase as you move forward and the theory will decrease. So this is a broad guideline, guys. I'm not going into the details of how to study. You should already know that. I know all of you know that. Individualize your preparations. That is the key, everybody. Only you know what you don't know. I don't know what you don't know. Only you know what you don't know. If you still don't know what you don't know, then please get to know what you don't know first, everybody. Please focus on your weaker and your stronger. Please don't make just a mistake of keeping on reading everything. Yes, everybody? I hope that this INECT recall discussion has been helpful to you. If you have any problem, everybody, please feel free to reach to us on Facebook or on Instagram or anywhere that you can. I will leave you with this slide. This should be your routine every day, everybody. Wake up, kick ass, and repeat. There should be nothing else, everybody. Done, guys? Thank you, everybody.